The City of Toronto's homeless shelters can't take more people in. This is news that John Tory, the Mayor of Toronto, shared with Canadians a few short weeks ago, and he attributed a large portion of this concern to the fact that Justin Trudeau has a new policy which allows people to illegally enter Canada.
If the auto sector saw an economic downturn, the government would come forward with millions or billions of dollars of bailout money. If Bombardier saw an economic downturn, the government would come out with billions of dollars of bailout. If a ketchup plant in southern Ontario went out of business, Canadians would boycott it. But what's happening in my province is that there are hundreds of thousands of people out of work, and what has this government done? They've put in place a carbon tax, they've put in place a tanker ban, they've failed to support the interests of Alberta. And what they're asking us tonight to do is to not fail in boldness, but instead to support a plan, this nationally determined contribution to Canada's economy that completely forgets my province. It completely forgets it, and they're gasping here. So my question is this: if they are asking my province to support this, will the minister stand up and tell us what price elasticity assumption she's used to show that the price that she's assumed in that nationally defined contribution will actually materially reduce greenhouse gas emissions without completely reducing the economy of my province to ruin? Why does this government treat Alberta like a fart in the room that nobody wants to talk about or acknowledge? That is where my constituents have been at with this government for over a year.
So we will go to a vote immediately on Mr. Anandasangari's.
Point of order, Mr. Chair. Actually, you cannot move a motion on a point of order in committee, so you are out of order. Okay. And also, according to Standing Order 116, in a standing, special, or legislative committee, standing orders shall apply as far as they may be applicable, except the standing orders as to the election of a speaker, seconding of motions, or limiting the amount of times in speaking of lengths of speeches. Therefore, my colleague is in order, and your ruling is out of order.
Chair, if I may just raise another point of order. In terms of timing, I think it's fair to say that we do have very important committee business, and I think the member has certainly put the matter on the record, and I think it's now important that we move forward to either discussion of the actual motion or to a vote.
I think all of us here, regardless of political stripe, would agree that ensuring rigorous controls of Canada's border helps to instill confidence in the immigration system, and I think also helps to prevent the rise of nationalist rhetoric, as we've seen south of the border. So my questions are going to be in that context. We heard this week that the IRB is at a 40,000 case backlog, which is incredible. So obviously we need to have any means possible to ensure that the spirit of the Safe Third Country Agreement is being pursued.
Trudeau's plan has basically been to bus people somewhere and hope that the provinces will take care of them. Over 800 people who haven't been able to be sheltered by the traditional homeless shelter system in Toronto have been temporarily put in college dormitories. On what Justin Trudeau was planning to do with 800 people, Minister of Nothing Bill Blair, who's supposed to be in charge of this, had absolutely no answer. I think we're going to put some people in hotels. Now,
where are those 800 people going to go?
I'm aware that plans have already been made to move those individuals into quite appropriate housing in hotels around the GTA.
For how long will they be staying in hotels?
Well, that really depends on their integration into the community and the processes that are currently underway.
How long do you anticipate that they will stay in hotels?
Well, again, we see a transition of those individuals out, and I think the situation is being very effectively managed.
How much will it cost to house those people in hotels?
I'd refer to senior officials on the actual cost.
Do you think that it's reasonable to house 800 people in hotels?
Do
you think it's reasonable to house 800 people in hotels?
I think it's reasonable to make sure that people have adequate shelter as they work through the due process that is required in their review.
Ms. Rampel, out of respect for the interpreters, they're very difficult for them to interpret in our two official languages if they're speaking over. So if there could be
Mr. Chair.
Next up on the grilling list was one of Trudeau's other minions who has a sort of a junior appointment. He's parliamentary secretary to the housing minister, or the minister who's in charge of housing and social programs. I thought maybe he would have some answers about this. Watch what he had to say.
How many people is the government projecting will cross at Roxham Road for the remainder of 2018 and then into 2019 that will subsequently be bused and require temporary shelter?
So I will refer those questions to the departments that manage those questions so you can get specific answers to it. And the answer, and the new normal I referred to was displacement of population, not the situation at the border.
I'm assuming you are here in your capacity as parliamentary secretary because you're supposed to be talking about the efficacy of your, quote, triage system, yet you cannot tell us how many people you are expecting to have to triage in the next year. Is that correct?
Well, what we're seeing is that numbers crossing the border at that particular point has dropped now to below 40.
Well, actually, year over year,
and as a result
from June of last year
the
to
number
June
is
of
fluctuating
this year,
and thankfully getting smaller.
It's increased year over year. So the graph is going like that.
Factually, that's incorrect.
So you can't tell us how many people are going to cross the border. The amount of commentary that was colorful that you had around the provincial government, who has been in office for 2 weeks. Are you planning to run for the leadership of the Ontario Liberal Party?
The answer to the question that I think you're trying to ask is how do we get to a system whereby the emergency housing system, which is the most expensive and least humane way to deal with any individual, let alone their immigration status, how do we move from that into a more robust housing program?
Understand how
that
long
will save cities money, provinces money, but more importantly, it will save people's lives.
Hotels for how long, and how much it's going to
the
cost
average
the
stay in the hotel.
Taxpayer. And to my colleague's question, if this is the best way to deal with people that are coming into the country this way, and whether or not Canada has the capacity to successfully integrate the amount of people that you have allowed to come into this country by failing to close
is that the system will be sustained as overwhelmed going forward.
We are sitting here in the middle of the summer for meetings, and you have provided no context, no answers, and no statistics for us. You are going to be coming out, and you said you're going to have more installment payments, and parliamentarians here outside of the budgetary process have less information than we did before. Your Prime Minister hired a minister who doesn't even know what his job is. Are you reporting into him? Specifically
currently
for people crossing at Roxham Road.
I'll give you an explanation. Currently, the shelter capacity in the City of Toronto stands at about 6,400 people, half of whom are children. That number has been holding steady at about 5,000 over the last 7 years. The way to create shelter capacity.
I have limited
the way to create shelter capacity in the system is to get those people out of the shelter system into permanent housing. That's the $40 billion national housing strategy. And then you have a set budget at the City of Toronto to deal with emergency housing.
I understand you're trying to talk the clock. That's fine, but we're not getting the numbers that we need here.
I was just giving you the numbers.
So the reality is that there's no plan from this government to manage the situation. There is no plan that parliamentarians can look at the adequacy of whether or not these budgetary expenses are adequate, if they're compassionate, and on what projections they're being made on. That is the data we were trying to get here today, and we've had minister after parliamentary secretary come woefully underprepared to provide this data to the committee. It is in scope, and I will continue these questions.
Thank you. Please continue.
Thank you. Mr. Vaughan, how many people do you project will need housing after crossing Roxham Road for the next 18 months?
What we're seeing is a decline in the numbers, and therefore we believe and hope that
10,
that situation, the situation
that is the end of the time. We now go to.
I report to the Minister of Social Development, and the question you've asked us about statistics. The question you've asked us about statistics, and what I'm telling you.
This is the second time that our colleague has wavered from the focus of the meeting. You know, Mr. Blair's job is not really relevant
to the agenda
here.
of the
Neither is the Ontario Liberal Party.
Actually, because point of order, response on the point of order outside of my time. The Prime Minister has appointed a minister to be in charge of this issue. And this morning, Mr. Chair, he said, I don't know what my job is. Then we have a parliamentary secretary who's sitting here says, I don't know how many people are coming in. You'd have to ask the Department of Immigration. This morning, the minister said, the CBSA and the RCMP don't report into me. What we're seeing here is completely relevant to the issue at hand. Is that
Justin Trudeau's Minister of Nothing, Bill Blair, coming back to committee after I had been sitting there. We had had probably 6 hours of meetings, and he came back at the end of the day. So he had 6 hours to prepare.
Circumstances. How many people are you planning to house in hotels over the next 18 months who have crossed at Roxham Road?
Well, and Mr. Chair, if I may, I'd like to refer that question to the officials who would have a far more accurate answer.
Chair, the triage concept that we're currently designing would see us triage 100% of the arrivals.
How many?
100% of
How
the
many?
arrivals.
How many quantifiably, precisely, how many people are you planning to put in hotels after they've crossed a Roxham Road in the next 18 months?
Sorry, I was answering the first question.
The question was, how could we know this? We need to have a plan at this point in time. You've got 800 people that are about to be moved out of shelters to parts unknown. You need to know. You have made a policy decision not to close the loophole in the Safe Third Country Agreement, and we need to know if you are adequately budgeting for the integration. The entire pillar that you've outlined here on working with the provinces talks nothing about the long-term integration costs of people who are humanitarian immigrants. And you've forgotten the opposite side of the coin. You've forgotten that it's not just about processing them at Roxham Road or taking a picture with them. You have to figure out how you're going to pay for their needs. So, Minister Blair, how many people are you anticipating that you will have to put in a hotel in the next 18 months?
Mr. Hussain?
Mr. Chair, the plan that we have in place is not a new plan. It's been in place.
How many people are you planning to put in a hotel, Minister?
Mr. Chair, if I may be able to
I need to know this. We have gone through hours of meetings with you, and I still don't understand how many people are coming through and how you're planning to pay
Just
for
to
them.
remind the member that a question is normally placed through the chair, and if you'd like to do that, that would be helpful.
Point of order, Mr. Chair, on decorum. You raised the right of the minister to answer questions or not. This is the umpteenth committee meeting that we have had. We have 800 people that are about to be evicted from a shelter or college dormitories in Ontario. And I've had 3 ministers plus a new minister who doesn't know what his job is, countless department officials, supplementary estimates, the budgetary process, committee of the whole, order paper questions, and we still don't know how many people they are projecting to come in and how they are budgeting for these expenses. And that is not compassionate, because we are in situations where they're having to, outside of the supplementary estimate process, piecemeal money to put people in hotels. We're not talking about how we're going to put together an integration plan for language training. I am just, at this point in time, on decorum, I cannot believe that we have ministers in front of this committee again with no numbers on projections, and they have to have this to the parliamentary budget officer by Thursday. So I'll ask my question again.
I'm just going to say that this is not a point of order. It moved into debate. Is there a point of order over here?
Mr. Chair, I'd like to...
I don't believe it was a point of order. I believe it was continued debate. Ms. Rempel?
Minister Blair. Minister Blair. No, I'm asking a question. I will ask you a question. Do you plan to comply with the parliamentary budget officer's request?
Mr. Chair, you've already indicated that questions need to be directed through you. And I believe the last intervention indicated that that question was directly asked.
Let me rephrase that. Mr. Chair, this is my time, and I will ask a question of the minister. So through you, Mr. Chair, will the minister comply with the parliamentary budget officer's request to provide projections on the amount of people they anticipate coming through the border in the next 18 months by Thursday? And the request is for 5 years. And if that is due on Thursday, why don't they have it here after we approved a $22,000 budget for the study, which the government members are unwilling to provide a report for?
Mr. Chair, I can advise you that this financial data has been compiled, and it will be provided to the parliamentary budget officer in the coming days as required.
Why hasn't this been provided to our committee for review? Why hasn't this been provided to the Ontario provincial government? Why is it secrecy and no plan?
Again, the member asked
if the information is being provided to the PBO. Will the minister table it to committee by the end of the day?
Thank you, Ms. Rempel. Thank you, Minister.
So unfortunately, even though the Liberals spent $22,000 on trotting their ministers in front of this committee, we have no more answers for you. But that doesn't mean we're not going to keep pushing. This summer, I'm going to be working to make sure that the Parliamentary Budget Officer, that study that I mentioned, actually happens. I want to scrutinize some of those numbers, and I'm going to be keep bringing these updates to you. And this is where your role is really important. Did you see how the Liberals try to shut me down with points of order every time I tried to ask a question or had those guys on the ropes? That's because they have no plan and no intention of developing a plan. They're hoping that this issue just goes away for them over the summer, and that's not compassionate and it's not fair. It's not fair to anybody, to newcomers to Canada or to you, the Canadian taxpayer. So I need you to share this video. I need you to talk to your friends about how woefully inadequate Justin Trudeau has been on the whole issue of immigration. And I need you to tell me what you think in the comments below. We're going to keep working hard for you, myself, my party, pushing on this issue. I'm still here in Ottawa trying to get some answers, but I'm working hard for you. Share this video. Have a great day.